I'm Peter Marks, theater critic of The Washington Post.
And I'm Elizabeth Vincentelli, and I write for The New York Times. We're back, April 2023, another round of scintillating theater talk on Marks and Vincentelli. Pretty much the only podcast you should bother listening when it comes to theater. I don't even... I mean, really, seriously, what else is there? Nothing.
No, it's completely objectively speaking.
Absolutely objectively speaking. Yeah. That's us and then the rest.
Yeah.
So
I hear that constantly.
People stop me in the street saying, right. I recognize you from your podcast.
I wait a minute, but actually, Elizabeth, I was somewhere recently, and someone tapped me on the shoulder at the theater and said, "Are you Peter Marks?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I recognize your voice. That's how I knew you were."
Oh my God!
From the podcast, yeah. I was like, "Whoa!"
Okay,
it's just so funny to me, but really, that's very, very flattering,
very impressive.
Yeah. So today we're upping the status of our podcast to legendary, not our legend.
Not yet.
But the subject, because we'll be discussing the life and legacy of one of the great dramatists, American dramatists of the 20th century, Lorraine Hansberry, who's most famously known, of course, for the seminal work, Raisin in the Sun, that is widely known and celebrated. But this is more centrally about the other play of hers that was produced in her own lifetime, The Sign in Sidney Brustein's Window.
The play, the revival, ended recently at the Brooklyn Academy of Music, and now it is moving to Broadway in a kind of last-minute addition to the season, and it will resume performances at the James Earl Jones Theater with the same cast, Oscar Isaac and Rachel Brosnahan. And they play Sidney Brustein and his wife, Iris, a couple who live in the kind of bohemian Greenwich Village, where Sidney has just purchased a kind of failing local newspaper. He's a kind of firebrand activist with great ideas, or grand ideas maybe. And Iris is a struggling actress. And the play deals with oh my God, the play is 3 hours long, and it deals with everything you can think of that would have been of concern to a kind of super active brain like Lorraine Hansberry at the time. So it deals with radical activism and racism and anti-Semitism and sexuality. And it deals with theater itself. There's a playwright character in the show.
And it's also, we should say also, it's at that sort of inflection point in American history. It was the early 60s. The Cold War was raging. Mm-hmm. There was a dawning of feminist ideas, of Black power was just becoming, civil rights were becoming an issue in the culture. So this was the Village at the time was kind of the geographical center of intellectualism and activism.
Yeah, and the play is full of that stuff. And so we have a great guest to talk about this today.
We have one of the most intimately knowledgeable people on the planet about the play, and who had a critical role in the creation of this production, as our guest, Joy Gresham. She is director and trustee of the Lorraine Hansberry Literary Trust, which is charged with the responsibility of overseeing Hansberry's legacy. She, of course, died at the beginning of 1964 at the age of 34, and actually only 2 days after the original production of The Sign in Sidney Brustein's Window closed on Broadway after 101 performances.
And welcome to the show, Joy. So I would say most Americans, and certainly all of American theatergoers, are familiar with Lorraine Hansberry, and her reputation among American theatergoers was made by a single play, which is pretty rare, actually, a Raisin in the Sun. So what do you think we should know about her that is overlooked? Because, of course, it's a huge achievement, but there's so much more.
That's a huge, that draws on a huge response from me. I guess because Lorraine because she was with us for so short a period of time in the public eye, and because she was so prolific for even a shorter period of time. So I like to remind people that we're talking about 5 years in which she was extremely prolific and active in the activist sense in terms of her engagements in the world. And she was extraordinarily conscious of the fact, as most people with prophetic sense are, that she had a really short time. And so she hit the ground running, doing as much as she could with her intellect and her spirit, and then eventually her name, her celebrity. Partly because of that, she's seen in a kind of spectacular kind of way, in an exceptional way. And that's legitimate. But I think because she was Black and female and an intellectual in the 1950s, she's seen in a kind of surreal way that wasn't really who she was. So because of when she was socially and politically framed in that, in that time span, it's easy to see her as sort of like the kid who broke the lines. So she was the first this, and she was the first that, and she was, by nature of that, when you unpack that, what it really means is what I'm saying when I use the word exceptional. There was something kind of exceptional and special about her. And it's kind of problematic because not only can you not like really draw a real life from that, it's kind of a cartoon, it's kind of a caricature, it's kind of a super image of someone. But she really, really, really was so much more than how we think of her. And so what happens for me, from where I sit, is that her other works beyond Raisin in the Sun and what she was known for are kind of a window into that. And when you enter into any one of those plays or essays or speeches or whatever the text is, you immediately, it's almost shocking. It's almost shocking for the person who only knows her as, the writer of A Raisin in the Sun, let's say. And so a lot of what I have to do is just say to people, and this comes back to I think the gist of what I hear in your question, like stay tuned, read more, don't be shocked, stay engaged, and be prepared to be surprised. Because in many cases, she's not, our assumptions limit us, She is not only more than what we imagine, but she may take what we're imagining and turn it upside down, turn it on its head, because we have to kind of get out of the way of our assumptions and how we come to welcoming Lorraine into our minds and our hearts. And we have to allow something else to happen. And that I'm most excited to jump ahead into this play, The Sign in Sidney Brustein's Window, which is my favorite work of hers, because it does that. It's just kind of, it spins you around and it kind of slaps you lightly. And it kind of gently pushes you down in the shoulder. So you have to sit down and kind of think about what just happened, what you just saw, what you just read, what you just, you were just in the presence of. And that's a lot of work for a reader or an audience, but I think it's essential because most of what we misunderstand about Lorraine is of our own making. And our own participation. And unless we're taught to question that, we're left with that. We're really left with it.
That's really interesting and really a great preface to understanding her sensibility in this play, Joy. Can you, before we talk a little bit more about Brustein, can you tell us a little bit about your own personal connection to Lorraine? And also, I know Robert Nemiroff, the producer, was Lorraine's former husband, your father, and they remained close even up till Lorraine's death. But tell us a little bit about your connection and what, as the head of the Literary Trust, what duties do you perform?
Well, my connection with Lorraine is through my father, Robert Nemiroff, who married my mother, Jewel Gresham Nemiroff, 2 years after Lorraine died. 1967, the year of the loving decision. No small detail there.
Yes.
And
Right.
I'm the only offspring of the collective. So Lorraine and Bob didn't have children. I was my mother's only child. I was adopted by Bob and raised by Bob and my mother, but I identify as the offspring. I really identify as being of Lorraine. And I grew up from the age of 10. I grew up in her house, which is a really important detail for my story. I grew up in her presence, her spirit, amongst her things, amongst her writing, amongst her paintings, amongst her LPs, amongst her artwork, amongst her books. But most importantly, she was a real presence for me. She was, and I knew from a young age that she was my guardian. She was really there, and I really connected with her. And I was the daughter of two writers. Both my parents were writers, and the home that Lorraine bought in 1961 with the proceeds from the screenplay, the movie A Raisin in the Sun, in Croton-on-Hudson, allowed her to buy this beautiful mid-century home that was like in the woods, and it was full of light and windows, and it was like a writer's sanctuary. It was an incredible space. And I was, as my mother used to name, I was born to be a dancer. And when I was a young child, I decided that I wanted to make dances. And so I grew up studying choreography, and Lorraine was my muse. Lorraine was really sort of like the person who kind of taught me about art and about dances and values about creating art. And so she was really important to me. She was important not just as a kind of familial figure, but she was important to me as a muse and as a real teacher in my life. And so that connection is really important to me. I grew up in this environment where I got to witness the creation of the kind of architecting of Lorraine's legacy on the part of my father. He was kind of another muse for me, and I consider him as my mentor. And so I kind of watched him build this legacy, which was drawn from these incredible intelligences that he had. I can't tell you how he knew what he knew and how to do it, but when he and Lorraine were working together, he was the organizer, he was the collector, he was the notator, he was the archivist, he was the preserver, and he had those lifelong skills, and Lorraine was allowed to be the artist. And so when Lorraine died, he had already begun to build the legacy. He had already begun to build the literary estate. He had already begun to register all of her works into copyright and to edit all of her published works so that they became books and they became scripts. And he had started that. And so I watched that with great interest, not knowing that I would ever be doing what I'm doing now. But it just spoke to intelligences in me. I was just really kind of drawn with and I got to know Lorraine through that. Like I had an ear to that. So I just kind of followed with great interest. And he was kind of my portal into Lorraine. And then parallel to the story I'm telling, Bobby had a singular purpose in bringing Lorraine's legacy and an understanding of Lorraine as an artist, activist, public intellectual to the world. And so he was really extremely focused on that and gave his life to it. My parents raised me to be free of that commitment. They were of the generation where they wanted me to be free to commit myself to other things that were of interest to me. So Bob lived as if he would live forever. And so there was never a question of who would follow him. But when we lost him in 1991 to cancer, my mother stepped into his shoes, and she immediately knew what to do and how to complete what he had started and what to do with it from, her own passion and vision. And my mother was like him. She thought she was going to live forever. So as my other parent, she, by that time, I was a college professor. I was a choreographer. I was living my life and had no real vision of, I was living the life that I was free to live, right? I lost my mother in 2005 to cancer, and in an extraordinary moment, which surprised even me, I stepped into her shoes. And I even though there were so many reasons for me not to take that on, I, without questioning, took it on. So that's how in 2005, I became the literary trustee. And the job that I inherited at that time was largely a job of licensing. That's mainly where I was needed. Lorraine's works were multimedia, so we have agents in print and stage and film and television. And we have attorneys, that work with the copyrights, and the job of licensor could be a full-time job, especially at that particular time when I inherited the job, which was one of the things that happened under my mother's watch as successor executor to my father, is that she deposited all of Lorraine's work to the Schomburg Center at the New York Public Library. And it was a milestone for us because it emptied like 14, 16 file cabinets of work, manuscripts. You wouldn't believe it, what Bobby had collected and curated. And it made it available to the public, which was his wish, his greatest wish. Along with, and a big part of this is her correspondence and her workbooks, her notebooks. And as of that time, it seems like as soon as that stuff was on the shelf, so to speak, people were banging at the doors to learn about her. And so at the time that I became the literary trustee, there was great creative energy in the air in terms of all these projects having to do with Hansberry and artists who were inspired by Hansberry. and I inherited just a licensing reality where every day, somewhere in the world, Hansberry, A Raisin in the Sun is being performed. And less likely LeBlanc, and even less likely the sun, Sidney Brustein's window, but To Be Young, Gifted, and Black is also very popular. And so I could have done that all the time, but something in me knew from the very beginning that my interpretation of my parents saying, "We dreamed of a life for you that is yours," that meant that I had to do something in a creative domain with the Hansberry work. It just couldn't be licensing.
If I may, I'm just curious about one thing. So you said
Yes.
that there was this kind of like burst of interest when
Yes.
you like around 2004 or 5. Why do you think that is? Like, was there something in the air at that point? Was it like, because I'm curious about how the perception of Lorraine as a public intellectual and as an artist has changed over the years, because clearly it's evolved,
Right.
Our perception. Why do you think there was this moment where people were like, oh, there's more to it than this play we read in high school or whatever?
Right. Well, that's a great question. There were a few things bubbling. So in 2004 was the first Broadway revival of A Raisin in the Sun.
Yeah.
Crazy. The first, right? And that was produced by David Binder, who had this brainstorm, along with some of the other people at the table, to bring Sean Combs into the mix.
Mm-hmm.
And Sean Combs was a new generation. And part of the idea, which was David's idea from the beginning, was to recreate a 1959 phenomenon of this play, which meant the creation of a new audience and sort of like the stepping over boundaries and opening into a new world and appreciation. And so that phenomenon of what happened in that revival is pretty extraordinary because it was a pivot moment. It was a shift.
Remember the press was like crazy, and there were also all those articles about all those new audiences who were like flocking to the theaters. There's a lot of excitement around it. It felt really,
a lot of excitement.
really vibrant at the moment. Yeah.
And part of what also figured into that was that it was the harvest. I think it was the harvest of a whole generation since the 1980s who grew up reading A Raisin in the Sun. And Lorraine has a different kind of value as an iconoclast because she is like forever young, and she's experienced as a young person.
That's true.
And so I was blown away as a teacher, following some of the, blogs, teacher-student blogs that allowed students to talk about Lorraine Hansberry in this way where they claimed her as like this, like young activist, youthful presence. And so that was in the air too. So that there was an understanding on some level that we can't look at Lorraine as A, dead, B, sort of like part of the past. And so it was exciting. That was exciting to me. I don't want to forget that because I want to come back to that in a minute. So that, all of that was exciting. And at the same time, Margaret Wilkerson, who's a biographer, was working on the authorized, singularly inclusive, all-inclusive biography of Lorraine. And it was supposed to come out at any point. And we were really excited and hoping that it was going to come out around the time of the revival. And so there was a lot of, and people, this was a really important biography because there had never been a singular kind of all-inclusive global storytelling of Lorraine Hansberry. So there was like a lot of excitement, not just about this play, but about this figure.
Yeah.
And all of that sort of came to a head. And so when my mother died in 2005, I came on board with a bias and with a mission that, number one, Lorraine Hansberry was of the future. She was not of the past. Her legacy was a living legacy, and it allowed us all to kind of claim her and our understanding of her. And I was really excited about that. That was a real pivot from even my parents who saw Lorraine as a historical figure. And I kind of, as an artist who needed Lorraine and believed that all artists need Lorraine, we all need Lorraine and what she had to say, that we had to liberate that idea. On some level, we had to think of her as like alive and with us now, and that we are on some levels behind her. We're trying to catch up to her in terms of our understandings of her work.
Do you feel also because for many years, decades even, she was just seen as the woman of one great piece of art, and that to me is very reductive because it's also a way to say, well, it could have been a fluke. And I think part of what you've been working on is saying, this was not a fluke. A fluke is an accident. It's something you stumbled onto. She's great. She somehow writes this great play. And so what you're doing with all this stuff that's coming out, and it's also part of the biographies and bringing back Bruce and saying, no, it's not a fluke. There's like a whole body of work. There's a great mind who's like firing in all directions, synapses are like, that's what's exciting, I think, about her work. It's like you can see like the cells like turning, and
you've really hit on something. I think you really hit on something.
But anyway, so I think, like I see, I don't know, I don't want to project on what you're trying to do, but it feels like that's part of the big picture, because I want us to talk about Sidney Brustein, which has a complicated history. So can you tell us a little bit background on that?
Yeah. So we have to change now how we're telling this story. we have to kind of like bring out the net and just like let all the pieces fall, because we can't talk linearly anymore. Okay. So I'm with you. So what you just described and the energy you're bringing to it is exactly the moment I walked into when I became literary trustee. And the paradigm had to change in terms of my job, in terms of access to Lorraine, in terms of representing her published work, the work that we think we understand, as well as presenting the work that we don't know about. And that was an incredible task, but I felt up to it. But I felt like some things had to change in terms of how Lorraine was presented. So one of the first things that I did, which contributed to launching that, was I decided when Margaret Wilkerson's exclusive agreement with the estate came up for renewal, that I was going to open the doors to anyone who wanted to write a biography.
Oh, wow.
Which kind of went against my parents. It was sort of a sin.
Okay.
But I decided, anybody who wants to write a biography, come, pitch it to me and I'll listen. And out of that came 3 projects: Imani Perry's book, Soika Colbert's book, and Tracy Heather Strain's documentary, Sighted Eyes, Feeling Heart, that she did for PBS. I was really encouraged by that. I felt, as I said to all of them, including Margaret, Lorraine needs multiple biographies. We need to understand the multiple sides of her. And if we get 4 books or 4 projects that tell completely different stories, great. That's just the point, right? And so part of what I understood was that we have to really understand her as I know her and as I was taught to understand her by my parents, which is that she is intersectional in her identity, in her work, in her practice, in her politics. And when you go into the Schomburg and you go into this treasure trove of her projects, the things she was working on, it becomes clear that she was working in as many languages, meaning as many mediums as possible. She was she was interested in she was still interested in journalism and telling the story, always. She was interested in fiction. She was interested in nonfiction. She was interested in plays. She was interested in essays. She was interested in poetry. She was interested in opera. She was working on opera. She was interested in. She was just working as quickly as she could to engage people, I think. And so it became really important to understand her in that way. And so the biographies, I think, help because they kind of give you a context for her genius, her creative genius, and her mission on some level. Like what was she trying to say, and who was she talking to? And so a play like The Sign of Sidney Brustein's Window is a wonderful kind of anchor. It's a wonderful ground to talk about what we're talking about because it was her last big project. And she came closest and she was proud of this play. She was really proud of what she did. And so she comes closest here to using theater to tell a story, to take people into to new worlds, to talk about intellectualism and thought and ideas, to talk about history and to go back and forward into history, and to talk about theater in a kind of fearless, critical way. Mm-hmm. And she did all this through the mouths of this like cohabitation entity, this household of people who are walking through, who were like totally divergent from one another, who had different, they were stakeholders in different kinds of movements and understandings. And they love each other, which is what makes everything possible. But at the same time, they're kind of critically at each other. And they each have dreams. They're each living for a dream. And in some ways, those dreams are rubbing up against one another. But wait a minute, pause here, because I just want to remind you that we're also talking about A Raisin in the Sun.
Right.
Same thing.
Gotcha.
Right?
Right.
Same thing.
Yeah.
But I think that, in a weird way, I think that Sidney Brustein is a more modern play.
Absolutely.
I think that it's also, I think of like some of the great English playwrights who've been sort of in the same waters. David Hare, for me, is very much probing some of those things. Even Stoppard sometimes, although maybe a little more, more self-consciously erudite. But I do think that there's Brustein is a revelation And it feels like a play that audiences or that theater goers will always have to catch up with. I wonder, it feels like it occupies that interesting space.
Yes, it does. It does. I think that Lorraine was radicalized, Elizabeth, by the way in which Raisin in the Sun was received. Critically and on a popular level. She was a little surprised by the way in which it was hijacked to be thought of as, a kind of middle-class integrationist story.
Oh, interesting.
Where there was a happy ending and there was a kind of hierarchical winning of Mama's dream. And that was a good thing. That was like a benevolent, good, taking care of everybody thing, even though it might have conflicted with the dreams of her children, right? And all of that was very, very quickly, even in the 1950s, constructed so that she had to constantly speak to that in interviews and she spoke to it. If you can ever find the conversation, she took it on. She really took it on. She deconstructed it and she just shamelessly went for it, unapologetically took it apart. But nevertheless, it was still, it still had power, holding power. And that's pretty much what we inherit as the conversation about that many people have about A Raisin in the Sun, which is based on a misunderstanding of Hansberry's intent. So she went into, and I like to talk about, I can go on with that. It's a fascinating story, right? But Lorraine wrote Sign immediately after A Raisin in the Sun. And I call it her sequel because she was trying to correct some things, at least in herself.
Right.
She wanted to be more clear in the second play, which in some ways was prophetically on the mark. It was like targeted because she was dying. She didn't have anything she wasn't holding anything back. When you look at Lorraine and her activity in 60, 62, 63, 64, the Bobby Kennedy meeting, etc., she was holding nothing back. So she writes this play, which is a play to really, in some ways, introduce people to a community that the stage had never really seen before. It was the same mission as introducing the audience to a Black family life in A Raisin in the Sun. It's the same mission. So now it takes place in Greenwich Village, amongst this intellectual kind of revolutionary community of people. And she's trying to do much the same, but she takes on the theater community at the same time.
Oh, yeah.
And so in order to do that, she has to kind of write this kind of two-parted play, as I see it, where the first of it kind of like travels the contours of realism and then the second half of it like breaks through to a whole nother level. Right?
The second act is so fantastic. I just love the second act.
It's
like blew my mind when I saw it.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
But there's also that sense of that issue of intersectionality so applies to her, and I think that is so current. It's so contemporary. I mean, it came in the other night when I watched White Girl in Danger, Michael R. Jackson's new musical. But I think that part of what I feel, and you're sort of validating for me, Joy, is that right after Raisin, she was going, no, don't put me in a box. I am not just, distilling the Black experience for white liberals to feel, that there's a happy end possible for us all. She was saying, I want to tackle all parts of this culture. I want to talk about white people. I want to talk about Black people. I want to talk about Irish politicians. I want to talk about, all strata of New York life, intellectual life. She didn't want to be put in a box. And as you say, she had no time left to say it all.
But, just to just to follow that, so what she did was that she said, because part of what she was responding to also was the feel goodness about a raisin in the sun that white people had, right?
Right.
Because her mission was to give access to truth, right? But rather than receive it as truth and value it as truth, it was kind of received as like a good feeling, like a liberal good feeling, right? Amongst liberals. So she went at that in the sign of Sidney Brustein's window. She's like, no, this isn't about a Black family. This is about white folks, right? This is about white community. This is about the expansiveness of intellectualism that you can understand, right? And part of that was her saying, so you can't hide behind this. You can't feel good. You can't appoint this to others and romanticize it as the experience of others. You're asked to show up. So she writes a play that engages you meaning all of us, that engages the audience, that does an important part of the work for the audience, that brings us into this environment and these conversations, but it leaves important things for us to do.
Right. So that's really well said, Joy. So there was finally in 2016, there was this revival directed by Ann Kaufman at the Goodman Theater, of Sidney Brustein, an important one, followed up by the BAM production, directed again by Kaufman, coming to Broadway. Is this for you? Is this piece, this production of Sidney Brustein akin to the Raisin that happened just as you were taking over the trust? Do you feel like this is another turning point production for the Hansberry legacy?
Yes, this is an important pivotal moment in the Hansberry legacy. It's an important kind of subsequent pivoting moment to how we understand Lorraine, because all the things that have led up to this enable us to understand her more deeply and more realistically and more powerfully now. So were it not for those things, we wouldn't be here, truthfully. So I think the audience, and that's the important factor for me that I'm always thinking about. I feel like we have done more work and more living, and we've had more experience in theater that we can understand this play in a way that we couldn't 60 years ago. It's because we live in an intersectional world, like it or not, whether we admit it or not. We've been influenced by that. Especially sort of the critical, questioning, difficult nature of it, and so there's just it's a little more normative for us to kind of come into some of the values of the play, the content of the play, the spirit of the play in a way that was impossible 60 years ago, and even 20 years ago would have been challenging. It's only because of the moment that we're in that I think there's a chance for the sign of Sidney Brustein's window to be explored. We're halfway there because what happened at BAM, as I've, Peter, we've spoken about, the millennials and the Gen Z audience showed up, and they were like, they just took it. They just claimed it. And they were like, this is a great play. And they were ready for it. You know, and I think that's literal. I don't just think, I know that's why we're going to Broadway.
Fabulous.
So is there anything you could tell us about, like, what are the next steps for the, like, what is there, like, are you already looking, are you still like working on this, or are you like already looking at what's next, what's on the horizon, like what?
Well, this play is part of a 15-year project for me.
Okay.
I'm in the 15th year of working on a revised script for this play.
Oh, okay.
Sort of following my father's process and model. And the road ahead for this particular play is that hopefully in a year or two, I'll be coming out with a revised edition of the script in book form, which allows us to include interviews with directors and producers and actors who've worked on developing the sign in Sidney Brustein's window, so that we understand it sort of through history. That to me is very important. It's a very important next step. I expect, and I'm already beginning to see the first signs of it, that there's going to be a complete turnaround in the licensing of the sign in Sidney Brustein's window. So that, and we haven't even talked about this, but you can kind of imagine, because of what we've talked about, the sign in Sidney Brustein's window was a graduate theater school play. It was a play that people were afraid to put on because they just didn't know how to tame it. They didn't know how to direct it. They didn't know how to, because it wasn't a Raisin in the Sun. And so I'm ready for the licensing of the play to kind of mushroom.
Yeah.
And I'm waiting for an interesting discussion, literal and figurative, to take place between the two plays, The Sign in Sidney Brustein's Window and A Raisin in the Sun, because people are going to have to start from where they are, which is like, well, which one's real? Which one's Hansberry? Because they can't both be from the same person, right?
Right.
And so there's going to be an unpacking of that. And someone will hopefully have the genius to perform them in repertoire together.
Well, Joy, it is, we could actually spend about 7 hours more on this. I think I could actually ask you questions all damn day. But you are a great steward, Joy, of this on this voyage, because you speak so eloquently and with such depth of both feeling and insight into what Lorraine meant and means. So we are grateful to talk to you, and I can't wait to see this production yet again.
Yeah, likewise.
So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just as a reminder, The Sign in Sidney Brustein's Window begins performances April 25th at the James Earl Jones Theater on West 40th Street in New York, and it runs until July 2nd. So some time to see it if you come to the city, if you live here, obviously, or if you come to the city for like a vacation.
I also think it's Oscar Isaac's Broadway debut. Rachel Brosnahan has been in plays on Broadway, has been on a Broadway play before.
Wow.
But Oscar Isaac has done plays in New York. I don't think he's done one on Broadway.
I mean, we both saw it at BAM, and his performance, I'm just going to say that his performance, just based on the BAM run, really, really stuck with me. So,
Yeah. So, wow.
Oh my God, I think we're done. Okay,
Elizabeth.
speaking of Broadway, we have to carve some time on a show to talk about the season, because we're...
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow. There's so much to talk about.
Oh, my God.
Much.
Yeah.
It's like...
Yeah. And it's still... Yeah, it's in its final throes as we speak, and I have a few more shows to get through.
I'm finally catching up with Parade tonight, so...
Oh, good. Okay,
No,
yeah.
a fun one, a fun light one.
Yeah, exactly. A lighthearted romp.
Lighthearted
so thank you. Join us next time on marksvincentelli.substack.com when hopefully we'll be talking about the Broadway season.
Oh my, yes. There's also another guest that we've been kind of coveting, and I hope they're available soon because I'm really dying to talk to them.
Yeah, we'll get them.
We'll get them.
We'll book them.
So follow us on Twitter for updates. What we have, although I realize we don't actually like to spoil. We tend to but we announce when the new ones drop. If you're not already a subscriber, of course, the best way to know is to subscribe. How easy is that?
Totally.
So subscribe. You can reach out to us with questions, suggestions on social media. My Twitter handle is @evincentelli and Peter is @PeterMarksDrama. So we'll talk to each other and to you maybe soon.